Hello YouTubers and fellow hams. This is number 2 in the series on my exploration of the truSDX radio. A couple of days ago I powered it up for the first time, and I had all kinds of trouble. It was crashing right and left. If I rotated the VFO knob too quickly, garbage on the display and it would reboot. Sometimes during transmit it would reboot. Tapping on the case, hitting one of the buttons once in a while would cause it to put garbage on the display and reboot. And I thought, well, there's got to be a bad connection in there somewhere. Now, I ordered a pre-assembled version, and it's a kit, right? And what you're doing when you do that is you're paying somebody to assemble the kit for you. And so you're going to be at the mercy of their skills, their soldering skills, their exhaustion perhaps, because they're sitting there and assembling these things all day long, and with repetition doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes you get just a little bit sloppy, and so I wasn't exactly surprised. And I've heard from a lot of people that have purchased the pre-assembled kit and had absolutely no problems. The radio works fine. So I just got a lemon, and I decided I'd go ahead and open it up and see what's going on. All right, got it apart. I will say I kind of like the 3D printed case design. Here's one of the side panels, and as you can see they have slots where the boards, when they're sandwiched together, slide into. And the whole thing kind of goes together like a puzzle box with the screws interlocking in certain spots. Really clever. I really like the case design. But looking at the boards, I've had my lens out and I have been attempting to really get a good look, and some of the solder points I'm not a fan of. Also, I can see where they ground off pins, and I'm going to get my my little USB camera microscope thing out and try to take some closer shots of these, because I really need to see them before I reflow some of these solder joints. But some of these solder joints do not look great. I'm sitting here with my USB camera going along and looking at the solder jobs. Sorry about the poor quality of the image. That little webcam is low resolution, but it gets the point across. So these are some of the header pins, and this one here looks pretty good. If we look at that, it's a nice pyramid. It's making contact with the pin, and it's making contact with the pad. That's a good solder connection. This one over here is not too bad. These could have more solder over here, and this one almost looks like it was retouched. We've got sort of solder on the pin up here that's pretty good. We got solder on the pad out here that's pretty good, but there's this interface between them that looks a little incomplete. But it's making an electrical connection. It's probably not as mechanically strong as it could be. But of note are all these little flakes of debris out here, little splatters of solder that are just laying around. And we'll see more of that in a moment. This is the underside of the RF board, and they had, well, it shows more of that debris. You can see like over here is a big flake that should probably have been cleaned up. These things can break loose, float around the board, and short other components. And you can see like over here there's a little solder blob that must have bubbled off when it was soldered. And those are the things you got to watch out for. I did find a few of those laying around on the board, and one was across the pins on one of the SMD chips, and might have been causing some of my issue. This you can see they were cutting off the pins on the underside of the RF board to keep them from touching the other board, and they were maybe a little too aggressive, but this is a little bit sloppy, this solder point. But again, it's not terrible. That would work. It's just not as clean as I'd like it, but that's just me. But again, you can see this debris out here, these little flakes of solder that should have been cleaned up. If those come loose, they can cause problems. Moving on to the next one. This, I think, was a big part of my problem. This pin here, the blob of solder was floating on a layer of resin and not making contact with the pad. I was actually able to put a little pressure on the tip of this with the needle nose pliers and see it moving back and forth slightly. So that might have been one of my main issues. And again, we can see little flakes of solder laying all over the place that should have been cleaned up. Moving on to the next one. The most mangled one. I don't know what happened there. I think they were just way too aggressive when they were cutting pins off, and just this one was just totally mangled here. And if we look again, we got tons of solder debris just laying around. And here's a solder blob that's almost loose. It could pop off pretty easy. These were all over the place, and I think again that was part of my problem, because I found one of those laying across pins on one of the SMD chips that must have come loose. It was just floating. I blew on it and it went away. These pins on the other board header didn't have enough solder. This one here was loose. I could move it with needle nose pliers, and this one again here was loose. I could move it with needle nose pliers, and there was just not enough solder on them, so they had to be redone. Some of them were like this, where they had an electrical connection. You can see the solder is here from the pad to the pin, but there's just not enough solder on there, and so that was another issue that I had to correct. More of the underside of the RF board. It had a lot of this debris. I mean, you can just see all of this splatter and debris over here that wasn't cleaned up. And there's another solder ball that's sitting there that can go flying around. There's another one up here. Yeah, more of the same. And again, more of the same. Lots and lots of these flakes of loose solder that could easily flop around and short things out. And here and here and here and here and there. So yeah, that was the kind of stuff that I had to clean up. And I brushed the board to remove a lot of those little solder balls and get it all clean, and it seems to have solved the problem. Yeah, okay, so I had to reflow a few solder points. That did fix the issue. The radio is solid now. It works without any further crashes. Soldering is one of those things. It's a skill, and it's one of those things where everybody has their own minutia, their own particular quirks about the way that they solder. And there's a lot of people out there that their way's the right way, and anybody who doesn't do it their way is an idiot. And I'm sure I'm going to hear from those people in the comments, and those comments will generally be ignored because it's just one of those things, you know. And you've got to bear in mind, you're paying somebody else to assemble the kit for you, so you're going to get whatever they do, you know. And I'll cut them a little slack, because I can imagine if I was the guy that was sitting there just building these things all day, it would get old pretty quick for me. And anytime that you do something repetitively over and over and over again, you're going to make a mistake at one point somewhere along the line. It's just going to happen. You know, you get lax when you're doing a repetitive thing. So yeah, it could have been a lot better. If it was me 10 years ago and I was assembling the kit, those solder points would have all been very clean, because I'm detail oriented, and when I used to do a lot of soldering, you know, every little solder point for a through-hole component was a nice pyramid. It was clean, there was good contact, and that was just the way that I did it. I was just really detail oriented. But I'm not sitting there doing the same job over and over and over again all day. So you know, I'm not that disappointed, and it's not that big of a deal for me. I reflowed a bunch of the solder points where they cut off the pins. They could have done a better job of that. I'm sure that they were just working fast, you know. So anyway, it's not that big of a deal to me. If you bought one of the pre-assembled kits and you're having a little bit of an issue with it being a little flaky, you might have to reflow some of those solder points. And that's just the way it is. Okay, so now I've got my radio working. I can move forward with my exploration of it. I'm going to do the power cord next, so I can run it off the 12 volts. I was using it off USB power. It's kind of cool that it's that flexible, though. I like that you can run it off USB power and you get a half a watt out, so it's QRPP. But you know, with the CW Flea, I've made plenty of contacts at 300 to 400 milliwatts. You know, so you could use it that way. You can plug in external power and get almost 5 watts out of it. It's flexible. I like that. And as far as the soldering thing goes, as I said, you're paying somebody else to assemble a kit for you. If you want it done perfectly, buy the kit and put it together yourself. And if you pay somebody else to assemble a kit for you, regardless of the situation, you know, if it's a Heath kit or whatever, and you paid a local ham to assemble it for you, I would inspect it myself after it was assembled, probably, and look for little mistakes. Maybe clean up the little solder blobs. There was a lot of those little solder blobs that were floating around on the board that I brushed away. Sometimes when you're soldering, there's air bubbles in the solder, and when the solder melts, those air bubbles expand, pop, and spew out little tiny flecks of molten solder that hit the board and turn into these little bitty balls. And those can float around in short pins and things, and so you want to clean those up. And there was a bunch of those that I saw on the board. And I took an old toothbrush and brushed them all away, and you know, cleaned the board that way before I put it back together. So yeah, I had to do a little cleanup. As I said, I've heard from a lot of people that bought the pre-assembled kits that the radio worked fine out of the box. They've had no problem with them. Mine is undoubtedly a very rare example. So don't be too harsh in the comments. It is what it is. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with making the Anderson power poles shell for putting Anderson power poles on the power cord. And that'll probably be the next video in this series. And we'll see you then. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you're not already a subscriber, click to subscribe. Join us on the Facebook channel for discussion about the videos. And if you'd like to help support this channel, please click to support me on my Patreon page.